She was already in her seat when they told her to get out. Not loudly, not rudely, at first. Just that particular tone that certain people use when they've decided the conversation is already over. Clipped, efficient, certain. The kind of voice that doesn't expect to be questioned. Marcus Webb, 41. Founder and CEO of Northbridge Capital, one of the largest private equity firms headquartered in Toronto, had been sitting in seat 3A of the Prestige Lounge at Vancouver International Airport for approximately 12 minutes when the assistant manager approached him. Marcus had a carry-on bag at his feet, a half-finished Americano on the side table, and his laptop open to a spreadsheet that represented, give or take, $800 million in pending acquisitions. He was wearing a grey hoodie, dark jeans, and running shoes that had seen better days. His flight to Toronto didn't leave for another 40 minutes. He looked, by every measure that the assistant manager, a man named Derek Folds, 34, seemed to care about, like someone who had wandered in by mistake. "Excuse me," Derek Folds said, stopping 3 feet away with his hands clasped behind his back. "This is the Prestige Lounge. Access is restricted to Platinum Tier members and above or guests of the Harborview Club." Marcus looked up from his laptop. He had dark eyes that didn't seem to register alarm at much of anything. He said calmly, "I know." Derek waited. When nothing else came, he continued, "Can I ask how you gained access to this facility?" "Through the door," Marcus said. "I scanned my card at the entrance." "Right." Derek's expression shifted into something that was trying very hard to look professional and neutral, but was achieving neither. "The thing is, we've had some issues recently with shared credentials, with guests using cards that belong to other members. I'm going to need you to verify your membership." Marcus considered this for a moment. Around him, the lounge hummed quietly. Soft leather chairs, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the tarmac, a bar that was technically open, but too early for most people. 3 other guests sat at various distances. A woman in a business suit reviewing documents, an older gentleman asleep with a newspaper across his chest. A couple speaking quietly near the windows. None of them had been asked to verify anything. "You can call the front desk," Marcus said pleasantly. "Ask them to pull up the scan log from the entrance. My card was issued to me personally. It's not transferable." Derek's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "It's just a routine check, sir. If you could show me your card and a piece of photo ID. You didn't ask anyone else." A pause, short but real. "I ask whenever there's a concern," Derek said. "And what's your concern? Specifically?" The question sat in the air between them like something neither of them wanted to acknowledge directly. Derek Folds was not, Marcus suspected, a man who thought of himself as someone who held biases. He probably would have been genuinely offended by the suggestion. He was doing his job. He was being diligent. He was protecting the integrity of a private facility. He could have constructed a perfectly reasonable explanation for why Marcus Webb, black, 41, wearing a hoodie, sitting alone with a laptop, had prompted him to walk over when the woman in the business suit, the sleeping man, the couple at the window, had prompted him to do nothing at all. But Marcus didn't say any of that. He had learned, over many years, and many rooms like this one, that there was a particular kind of exhaustion that came from saying that kind of thing out loud, and a different kind of power in simply not giving someone the reaction they had, perhaps unconsciously, been banking on. He reached into the front pocket of his carry-on and produced his wallet. He removed a matte black card, no logo, no numbers on the front, the kind of card that most people in that room would have recognized on sight, and held it out without standing up. Derek took it, looked at it. Something shifted in his face that he didn't quite manage to conceal. "I'll still need the ID," he said, but his voice had changed register. Marcus handed over his passport. Derek looked at it, looked at the card, looked back at Marcus in a way that suggested he was running some kind of internal calculation and not particularly enjoying the results. "I'll just confirm this at the desk," Derek said. Take your time. Marcus said, and turned back to his spreadsheet. He did not watch Derek walk away. He did not track the conversation that happened at the front desk, though he could see it in his peripheral vision. Derek speaking quietly to a young woman, named, according to her name tag, Priya. Priya pulling something up on the computer. Priya's expression going very still, then saying something back to Derek that made Derek go very still as well. Marcus took a sip of his Americano. It had gone cold. What Derek Folds had just discovered, at the front desk of the Prestige Lounge at Vancouver International Airport, was that Marcus Webb held a founding member card, one of 12 issued, at the personal invitation of the Airport Authority's Executive Board to individuals who had made significant capital contributions to the airport's expansion project 3 years. Prior, Northbridge Capital had contributed $42 million to that project. The card granted Marcus unlimited access to every Prestige facility in every terminal, a standing reservation in any private suite, and, though this was perhaps the detail most relevant to the current moment, a direct line to the office of the airport's chief operations officer. Derek came back. He walked a little differently than he had before, less certainty in the stride. "Mr. Webb," he said, "I want to apologize for the inconvenience. Everything is in order." Marcus closed his laptop, not because he was angry. He didn't feel particularly angry, which was something people always found surprising when he described moments like this one later. What he felt was tired, and also, underneath the tired, a kind of resolve that had calcified over years into something almost indistinguishable from patience. He had been in too many rooms where someone decided, based on his hoodie, his age, his face, that he didn't belong there. He had learned that reacting with anger gave those people something. A justification, a story, a way to reframe what had happened. He preferred to deny them that. He looked at Derek Folds and said, very quietly, "I'd like to speak with your supervisor." The supervisor was a woman named Catherine Marsh, 52, regional lounge manager for Pacific Gateway Hospitality, the company contracted to operate all airport lounge facilities in the terminal. She arrived within 4 minutes, which suggested Derek had already made the call from the front desk. She was professionally dressed, moved with the practiced calm of someone who had managed difficult situations before, and extended her hand as she sat down across from Marcus, with the expression of a person who was very clear on the size of the problem in front of her. "Mr. Webb, I'm Catherine Marsh. I understand there's been an issue this morning." "There has," Marcus said. "I want to assure you that what happened was not consistent with our protocols or our values." Derek was acting on what he believed was a legitimate concern, but the manner in which he handled it. "The manner," Marcus said, "was fine. He was polite. The question I want answered is why he approached me and not anyone else in this room." Catherine Marsh looked at him steadily. She was good at this. She didn't deflect or get flustered. She said, "That's a fair question, and it's one I intend to look into directly." "Good." Marcus leaned forward slightly. "Because here's what I observed. I've been sitting in this lounge for approximately 15 minutes. In that time, no other guest was approached or asked to verify their membership. I was the only person asked. I was also the only black person in this room." He paused. "I'm not making an accusation. I'm describing what I saw." Catherine held his gaze. "I understand. I'd like to know what Pacific Gateway's procedure is when an incident like this is reported, not the general policy, the specific steps, with timelines, and who's accountable." She walked him through it. Incident report filed within 24 hours. Internal review within 5 business days. Response to the affected guest within 10. Marcus listened, nodded, and then said, "I'd also like the name of the corporate contact at Pacific Gateway for the Airport Authority account. Not your direct supervisor, the account holder." Catherine's composure didn't break, but something behind her eyes recalibrated, because she understood now what that question meant. She understood the shape of what she was looking at. "I can provide that," she said. "Thank you." Marcus sat back. "One more thing. I'm not interested in Derek losing his job over this. I want to be clear about that. What I want is for someone, ideally more than one person, to think very carefully about what happened here today and why. And I want that thinking to be formal, documented, and attached to a process that has consequences if it happens again." He looked at her evenly. "To anyone." Catherine Marsh nodded. She was a professional. She recognized a person who knew exactly what they were doing and said simply, "I'll make sure of it." Marcus boarded his flight 40 minutes later. He sat in 3C, not a premium seat, not a lounge chair, not a suite. He had booked economy because he'd had a late change in schedule, and the alternatives were a 6-hour wait or a middle seat in business class. And Marcus Webb had long since stopped making travel decisions based on what other people thought those decisions said about him. He put in his earbuds. He pulled up the same spreadsheet. The man next to him, mid-50s, reading glasses, a paperback novel, glanced at Marcus's screen and then looked away, then looked back. The numbers were very large. "Finance?" the man said, with the cautious friendliness of someone making small talk on a plane. "Something like that," Marcus said, and closed the laptop. He slept for the first hour of the flight. When he woke up, somewhere over the Rockies, he had 3 missed messages. The first was from his assistant, Claire, forwarding a voicemail from the office of the Pacific Gateway Hospitality Corporate Director, saying they were reaching out to discuss an incident at Vancouver International and asking if Mr. Webb would be available for a call. The second was from his general counsel, a woman named Patricia Osei, who had somehow already heard about what happened. Marcus had mentioned it briefly in a text to a colleague, who had apparently mentioned it to someone else, and was asking if he wanted her to be on the corporate call. The third was from an unknown Vancouver number. He listened to the voicemail. It was Priya, the front desk attendant, speaking quietly, as if she wasn't sure she should be making the call at all. She said, "Mr. Webb, I just wanted to say, I'm sorry for what happened this morning. I pulled the scan log after you left, and I looked at every entry from the past 2 hours. You were the only person we stopped. I thought you should know that, and I thought someone other than Derek should say sorry for it." Marcus set his phone face down on his tray table and looked out the window for a while. He was not a man who cried easily. He had built something from very little across many years, through meetings in rooms where the door had to be pushed open a second time before anyone acknowledged he'd entered. He had learned to read a room in under 30 seconds, to identify who in it had already decided something about him before he spoke, and to redirect that energy without letting it touch the core of what he was doing. He was, by the metrics that most people used to measure such things, successful, formidably so. None of that made what had happened at the lounge smaller. None of it meant that the tiredness went away. But Priya's voicemail sat in his chest differently than the corporate director's call, or Patricia's offer to lawyer up, or the coming weeks of formal process and documented apologies. It sat there like something small and real. He texted Claire back, "Yes to the call. Ask Patricia to join." Then he added, "Also, can you get me the name of the front desk attendant at the YVR Prestige Lounge this morning? First name Priya. I'd like to send a note." The call with Pacific Gateway's corporate director, a man named Robert Glendale, happened the following afternoon in a boardroom on the 32nd floor of Northbridge Capital's Bay Street office. Marcus sat at the head of the table. Patricia Osei sat to his left. Claire had a notepad open and a recorder running. Robert Glendale was on screen from Vancouver, flanked by 2 people Marcus didn't recognize, legal, presumably, or HR, or some combination. Glendale was the kind of person who had spent his entire career managing up and had become very good at the specific skill of projecting accountability without actually being accountable. He was sorry. He was distressed. He wanted He wanted Mr. Webb to know that this was not reflective of Pacific Gateway's culture or values. Marcus let him talk for several minutes. Then he said, "Robert, I appreciate that. What I'd like to discuss is process." He laid out what he wanted. Not a settlement, he was explicit about that. Not a public statement, not a press release, not a choreographed act of corporate contrition, designed to get ahead of a story. What he wanted was a third-party audit of incident reports across all Pacific Gateway Lounge locations for the past 2 years, with specific attention to whether guests of color were disproportionately subject to credential checks. He wanted the audit results shared with the airport authority. He wanted a revised training protocol, documented and time-bound, with measurable benchmarks. Robert Glendale stared at him from the screen. "That's a significant undertaking," he said. "It's a reasonable one," Marcus said pleasantly. "You operate in federally regulated space. The airport authority is one of your 2 largest clients." "I sit on the advisory board of the airport authority." He let that sit for exactly 1 second. "I'm not telling you this to be threatening, Robert. I'm telling you because transparency about who's in this conversation seems fair. You came to me. I want to make sure we're using the time well." The silence on the other end of the call lasted 4 seconds. Marcus counted. "I'll need to take this back to our executive team," Robert said finally. "Of course," Marcus said. "I'd suggest doing it quickly. The airport authority's quarterly review is in 3 weeks. I imagine you'd rather walk into that meeting with a plan already in progress." Patricia made a small, almost imperceptible sound beside him. That was not quite a laugh. The call ended. Patricia looked at Marcus across the table and said, "You know they're going to do it." "I know," Marcus said. "You didn't have to give them the out." The "I'm not being threatening" part. Marcus leaned back in his chair and looked at the ceiling for a moment. "I know that too," he said, "but I meant it." 3 days after the call, Pacific Gateway issued an internal memorandum to all lounge location managers announcing a voluntary audit of credential verification practices. The language was careful, institutional, designed to sound like a proactive choice rather than a response to pressure. Marcus read it, filed it, and moved on. 1 week later, Derek Folds received a formal notice that he was being reassigned to a non-guest-facing administrative role, pending the outcome of the internal review. This was not what Marcus had asked for, and when his assistant forwarded him the news, he sat with it for a moment before deciding what to do about it. He wrote a short email to Robert Glendale. It said, "I was informed about Mr. Folds' reassignment. I want to reiterate what I said in our call. I don't believe removal from his role serves the purpose of this process. The goal is structural change, not individual punishment. If there's a path to putting him through the revised training and returning him to his position, I would consider that a better outcome. I leave it to your judgment, but I wanted to be clear." He sent it. He didn't know what they would do with it. He suspected it would complicate things for Robert Glendale, who had probably found it easier to move Derek sideways than to deal with the larger question of why he had done what he had done. Individual accountability is tidier than structural change. It resolves faster and requires less honesty. But Marcus Webb had not gotten to where he was by settling for the tidy resolution. Catherine Marsh called him herself 2 weeks after the incident on a Wednesday morning. He was in his car, stuck on the Gardner Expressway. When her name came up on the display, he answered. "Mr. Webb, I hope I'm not interrupting anything important." "Traffic," he said. "What can I do for you, Catherine?" "I wanted to update you personally on where things stand," she said. She walked him through it. The audit was underway. A consulting firm had been engaged. Preliminary findings would be available in 6 weeks. The training revision had been fast-tracked. A pilot version was already being tested in 2 locations. Derek was in the program. "Thank you," Marcus said. "I appreciate you calling directly." There was a pause on the line. Then Catherine said something that he hadn't expected. "I've been in this industry for 22 years. I've managed a lot of incidents. And what I've learned is that most people, when something like this happens to them, either want an apology and nothing else, or they want blood. You didn't want either." She stopped. "That's unusual." "I wanted change," Marcus said. "Apologies expire. Blood makes good news for about 48 hours. Change is more work, but it's the only thing that actually matters." Catherine was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I'm going to use that, if you don't mind." "Use it," Marcus said. He sat in traffic for another 20 minutes. Outside the windows, Toronto moved slowly in the February grey. The lake flat and cold in the distance, the city stacked and humming with the particular indifference of large places. He thought about Priya's voicemail, which he had listened to twice more since the flight. He thought about Derek Folds, reassigned to a back office somewhere, probably confused about how a routine credential check had turned into a corporate audit and a revised training protocol for 43 lounge locations across the country. He thought about all the people who had passed through those lounges before him, who had been stopped or not stopped, who had said something or not said something, who had the energy that day to push back or didn't, whose name didn't appear on any founding membership card, whose call wouldn't have been returned by a corporate director in 48 hours. He thought about what it meant that his card, his name, his $42 million were what had made the system listen, and he thought, as he had thought many times before in many different rooms, that the goal was not to become powerful enough that the system finally treated you with dignity. That was a finish line that moved. The goal, the actual, harder, less satisfying goal, was to use whatever position you'd managed to reach to make the system work differently for the people who didn't have the card. Whether he had done that here, he genuinely didn't know. The audit might produce findings that went nowhere. The training might change language without changing instinct. Derek Folds might return to his post and stop one more person next year for reasons he would again be unable to name. But something had been set in motion that hadn't been in motion before. A process existed that hadn't existed before. Priya had made a phone call she hadn't been required to make. Catherine Marsh was going to repeat something he'd said in a staff meeting somewhere someday, and someone in that room would hear it. Marcus Webb had learned, over 4 decades and more rooms than he could count, that this was how things actually changed, not in the dramatic moment of revelation, though he understood why that moment was satisfying to imagine, but in the quieter accumulation of processes started, conversations had, people who made the unnecessary phone call. The traffic broke. He moved forward. His phone lit up. A calendar reminder for a board call in 20 minutes. $800 million in pending acquisitions. 14 people waiting on his read of a situation. A company he had built from a rented desk in a shared office on Queen Street West. 13 years ago, when he had been 28 and had exactly 1 client, and a pitch deck that had been turned down by every major firm in the city before one person, finally had listened. He merged onto the exit ramp, phone in the cup holder, eyes on the road, heading back toward the city where he had built something from nothing, and would, without question, have to prove that, again tomorrow, to someone who hadn't gotten the memo yet. He was ready for that. He was always ready for that.